Here's a number that should terrify you more than it does. At the coldest point of the last ice age, the entire population of Europe may have dropped to small bands of 20 to 30 people, not 20,000, not 20 per city, 20 people total, wandering across a frozen continent the size of Europe, treating the whole landmass as one shared hunting ground. We were that close to just not being here, not a meteor, not a war, just cold, slow, and almost total. And yet, you exist, which means somebody in that handful of freezing, starving humans figured it out. Let's be honest about what they were up against, because Ice Age makes it sound like a cold afternoon. 20,000 years ago, global temperatures sat around 6 degrees Celsius colder than today. Doesn't sound like much. 6 degrees is the difference between London as a living city and London buried under a kilometer of solid ice. Sea levels were 120 meters lower. Britain was just attached to Europe. You could walk from Siberia to Alaska on dry land. And the humans walking through this? Wrong species for the job. No thick fur. No fat layer like a seal. Can't drop our heartbeat and sleep through winter like a bear. Strip a human naked in real cold and you've got hours, not days, before the body just shuts down. Meanwhile, the animals around them were built for this. Mammoths, fur, and fat. Cave bears, hibernation built in. Cave lions bigger than any lion alive today. On paper, humans should have been the first to go. We had two things instead. A brain that could plan ahead and hands that could build the things our bodies didn't have. Turned out to be just enough. It starts with fire because nothing else works without it. Humans had been controlling fire for somewhere between 300,000 and a million years by this point. Not a new trick, ancient, mastered technology. Archaeologists digging up Ice Age fire pits in Ukraine expected rough little campfires. Instead, they found engineered fireplaces. One of them burned hot enough to hit over 600 degrees Celsius, hotter than your oven's self-clean cycle. But here's what people miss. Fire wasn't for warmth. Warmth was just one of about 15 jobs it did at once. It cooked food, and cooked food gives you dramatically more usable calories than raw food. Some researchers argue this is why the human brain could afford to grow as large as it did. We traded gut tissue for brain tissue because fire did digestion's job for us. It kept a 300-kilogram cave lion at a polite distance because predators do not like fire and will not test it. It hardened wood into weapon tips. It threw light into days where the sun barely rose, which mattered for more than mood. It's when stories got told, knowledge got passed down, kids learned which plants kill you and which ones don't. Losing your fire in a blizzard with no way to restart it, that was a death sentence. Which means the person whose entire job was keeping the flame alive, the Firekeeper, may have been one of the most valuable people in the entire group, not the strongest hunter, the one who never let the fire go out. Fire has one massive weakness. You can't carry it everywhere. Step away, and the cold is right there waiting. So humans did something no other cold climate animal could do. They stole the insulation off other animals and wore it. We know they were skinning bears for fur in northern Europe at least 300,000 years ago. There are cut marks on bear paw bones in exactly the spot you'd slice to peel a hide off clean. But a draped skin leaks heat through every gap. Good for an afternoon, not good enough for a real ice age. The actual fix shows up around 30,000 years ago, and it's almost insultingly small. A sewing needle, a sliver of bone or ivory with a hole barely a millimeter wide drilled through the tip. One archaeologist called it maybe the single most important invention in human history. And it's hard to argue. A loose hide and a sealed, fitted, layered coat are two completely different machines. The needle is what turned one into the other. By the time you reach burials like Sungir in Russia, 34,000 years old, you find children buried in clothing sewn with thousands of individually carved ivory beads. Reconstructing the garments shows a three-layer system, a soft layer against skin to manage moisture, an insulating middle layer, a tough waterproof outer shell. Hoods, trousers, boots. That is almost exactly the layering system your hiking jacket uses today. They arrived at it 34,000 years ago through nothing but trial and error. meaning generations who got it wrong simply didn't survive to pass anything down, and generations who got it right did. They didn't stop at clothes. Hunters rubbed animal fat across their face and neck before heading out, sealed the skin, held heat in, blocked wind. Simple, a little disgusting, and effective. Out on bright snow, they faced a danger most people never think about: snow blindness, where glare off the ice can genuinely blind you. So they carved thin slits into bone and tied it over their eyes. The earliest sunglasses on record, made from a dead animal's rib. Forget the image of a caveman cowering in a dark cave. The real story is better. Out on the open plains of what's now Ukraine and Russia, there were no caves, barely any trees, so people built homes out of the one resource lying around in enormous quantity: mammoths. At a site called Prehistoric, archaeologists found circular houses constructed almost entirely from mammoth bone and tusk. Skulls and leg bones sunk into the ground as the foundation, ribs and tusks curving up into a frame. The whole thing braced and interlocked using nothing but stone tools and an extraordinary amount of planning. Some of these structures used material from over 150 individual mammoths. The biggest known example is about 18,000 years old, sitting right in the coldest stretch of the entire Ice Age, and the site shows signs of being reused for hundreds of years. These weren't huts. Inside, archaeologists find hearths, tool-making zones, storage areas. This was a planned home with interior design choices that still hold up. Many of these shelters used a cold trap doorway, the entrance dug lower than the sleeping floor. Cold air is heavy, so it sinks and pools right at the door, while warm air rises and stays up where people actually slept. They worked that out tens of thousands of years before anyone wrote down why it happens. They even used snow on purpose, pile it thick around a shelter, and it acts as insulation. The inside can stay close to freezing even while the outside air drops 30 degrees below that. Long before anyone built a proper igloo, people already understood that the space under a snowbank beats the open air above it. Staying warm keeps you alive tonight. Winter's real killer works slower. For months, there's almost nothing left to gather, and barely anything to hunt. Here's the math that made this brutal. In real cold, your body's resting metabolic rate can jump 50% or more just trying to hold its core temperature. Add hunting, building, hauling firewood on top of that, and the calorie demand becomes enormous. Run that deficit too long and you don't get gradually tired, you go hypothermic, your coordination falls apart, and you die, often fast, which is why fat, not protein, not carbs, was the most valuable substance in the Ice Age world. Gram for gram, fat carries more than double the energy, and it's exactly what your body burns for heat. A single adult mammoth, a third of which could be fat, could plausibly deliver around 500,000 calories, enough to carry a group of 25 people through several weeks. But that meant organizing a hunt against an animal that could weigh 6 times more than a car and had tusks built to turn a careless human into red paste, driving herds into boggy ground, ambushing river crossings, using fire and noise to steer panic in the right direction. At one site in eastern France, hunters used the same natural rock trap to funnel horses and reindeer for tens of thousands of years straight. Then came storage, because 500,000 calories means nothing without a way to keep it. They used the planet itself as a freezer, digging caches straight into permafrost, ground that stays frozen all year to hold meat for months. They smoked it, dried it into something close to jerky, rendered fat down, and stored it in animal bladder containers, and made something close to pemmican. Pounded dried meat mixed with fat and berries, calorie-dense and able to last for months without spoiling. They even weighed mammoth meat down and sank it in cold ponds, a natural fridge, no electricity required, nothing that could fail in a storm. Autumn wasn't a season of rest, it was a sprint. Every part of every animal got used. Nothing wasted. In a world where we now throw out half of what we buy. Here's the part that's easy to miss. These people expected winter. Their entire year was built around preparing for it. We're the ones who get caught off guard when a storm knocks the power out for one night, and they didn't survive it alone. Far more people lived under one roof than we'd tolerate today, in far less space, on purpose. Body heat is a real measurable heat source when enough bodies are packed close. The person with a room to themselves wasn't living in luxury. They were exposed. In a hard, cold snap, it was usually people living alone, often the elderly, who died first because there was nobody beside them to share warmth with. It also wasn't always gentle. Life was brutally hard, resources ran out, and there's solid evidence some ancient humans turned to cannibalism when food collapsed completely. Desperate measures for a desperate world. And there's a stranger possibility on the far edge of the evidence. At a Spanish site called the Pit of Bones, scientists studying 430,000-year-old remains found seasonal damage patterns in the bones, growth that stopped and restarted in cycles, signs consistent with not getting enough sunlight or food for stretches at a time. It's the same pattern seen in animals that hibernate. Some researchers have floated the idea that lacking enough fat reserves to make it through, these early humans may have slowed their bodies down into something like deep sleep to wait the worst of it out. It's contested. Plenty of scientists think there's a simpler explanation, but it's a serious enough idea that researchers are still arguing about it today. Which brings us back to that number from the start. 20 to 30 people, sometimes, was the entire surviving population moving across all of Ice Age Europe, squeezed into a handful of refugees where the climate stayed survivable. Pockets along the Mediterranean coast, mountain caves tucked into the Balkans. Most of the continent was simply empty, uninhabitable, a void. The people who made it weren't the strongest or the luckiest in some abstract sense. They were the ones who kept the fire alive, who sewed the seam tight, who packed 12 bodies into one mammoth bone room instead of one body into a room of its own, who buried the meat in the permafrost before the first snow hit. Every single choice was the difference between a bloodline that continues and one that just stops. You are descended from every single one of the people who got those choices right. Every single one. In a couple thousand years, nothing on this timeline. We went from interlocking mammoth ribs into a house to tapping a button on a wall for heat. The single deadliest force our ancestors ever faced is now something we mildly complain about on the walk to a warm car. We won that war so completely that we forgot it was ever a war at all. 20 people freezing in the dark against an entire planet trying to kill them. And somehow, here you are.